this calling to be. It was meant to be a very transparent calling. Your ministers, your spiritual ministers, were meant to pour their lives out. Were meant to get to know you and for you to get to know them. That's what the calling calls for, if I could say it that way. These people were concerned about Paul's well-being as a persecuted preacher of the Lord, but then also of him as their spiritual leader. Tychicus knew everything about Paul's affairs. He was with him all the way and was sent to them to share these things with them, to share his things, his affairs, how he was doing. Ephesians chapter 4, folks, and verse number 10 through 11 says that this position as a pastor and also missionaries and also evangelists, they were given these positions from Christ to local churches after his resurrection. We're told that pastors shepherd and lead and guide and oversee and tend or feed the flock. If that be the case, then it is good for you to know how your pastor is doing. It's good for you to know how your pastor is doing. To know of his affairs as he ministers to you. Too often there's a great gap between pastors and members. The pastor doesn't allow the members near, and consequently they know very little about his heart. He's just the guy that stands up there on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday night. And he's just the guy that does whatever pastors do. And the rest of the time, studying or visits hospitals and things like that. He's just the guy that's around. Perhaps it is that a pastor demands his privacy, or perhaps no one thinks to ask, but the pastor who cares very much about you and how you are doing needs someone to really care about how he's doing. Each pastor on our pastoral staff has left his family and come and made you his family. And it's a good thing that we know you, and it's a good thing that you know us. Pastors are mortal. They're fallible. They're breakable. They're hurtable. They're bendable. They're human to the core, just like you. The minister many times needs a Tychicus to know about him and to care about him. I remember years ago that Pastor Love, when I was assistant pastor at Ben Salem, he hurt his arm real badly. He pulled something or broke something. And from that point on, I was just thinking about that today. From that point on, I did the baptisms because his right arm he had pulled something and he couldn't do it anymore. He lost strength there. But I remember when he went into the hospital and he was going to have surgery on his arm. And I remember right before his surgery, the surgery that he had. Are you listening? Thank you. I remember right before the surgery that he had that it occurred to me, here he is in a hospital. He's from the Midwest. I'm sure that his wife is with him. But who else is with him? He would have been there if somebody else had had surgery. But who was with him? And so I hurried up and got ready. And being the good assistant pastor, I tried my hardest. And Pastor Valiente has done this, probably Pastor Pritt, in my situation. But, and I ran to the hospital, and I ran in, and I remember him just looking surprised as I showed up and walked in. And I asked him this, who pastors the pastor? And as I had been with him scores of times before, I brought my Bible, and I read him some verses, and I prayed with him, and it meant all the world to him. Pastors are real people. I know that's hard for you to believe, but it is true. So I think of the idea of knowing, of Tychicus knowing and taking the news, the affairs of Paul, the things of Paul to the church of Ephesus to comfort their hearts. As I think about this idea of knowing Paul's affairs, I think of my own ministry in these 17 years and how good it is to have men come alongside of me and care about where the Lord is leading me and what is going on in my life as a pastor. Many of you stopped by, and that's great. Many of you, I remember when I had a kidney stone, the first kidney stone I had, or second, one of the two. And I was in the hospital, and I was sick as a dog. And Jeff had taken me there, saved my life. I buzzed him early in the morning from up in my office, and it just had been communion, and I had drank probably 20 liters of grape juice that was left over up there. And I was starting out my morning, and I was praying before the Lord on my knees, and a pain hit me like I could not tell you. I want to tell you, it was the worst thing I'd ever felt in my back. It was terrible. And I play this up, but it was much worse as it actually happened. I drugged myself over to my phone, and I pushed the button, and you can ask Jeff. I said, come get me, come help me. And he ran up as fast as he could, and it was terrible. I'm just going to tell you this. You can be sick if you want to. My whole bathroom up there was just covered with grape juice. It looked like blood. It looked like someone had been shot and everywhere. It was bad. I was sick as a dog. And he took me to the hospital, and I remember there I felt so terrible, sick. And who comes in? But a couple of men from this church in their ties, 2 of them at different times. I was sick as a dog. I didn't want to see anybody except Jeff. Somehow he was a comfort to me. I didn't want anybody. I didn't want anybody. And I was sick, and there they came in. And this guy, I remember one of them. I'm not going to tell you who they are, okay, because I don't want to embarrass you. But I remember him being all very just loving. And, Pastor, let me pray with you, Pastor. And as he's praying, I'm reaching for any bowl I can find. And I'm throwing up. And he's praying, Lord, help the pastor. And I think he got the idea, because he just ran out of there. He knew that I was in no condition. But I'll tell you what that did. He was a Tychicus to me. And I'll never forget that, because that was a great encouragement. A great encouragement. You ought to know your pastor. Say, Pastor, I don't want you to know you in that way. Okay, I can understand that. You should know about your pastor, how he's doing, and how his family's doing. You should frankly know how my wife is doing, how the wives of these pastors are doing. It's important. Not for the intention of having to do something. We don't want you to do anything for us. Just love us. Okay? It's missionaries that have their hand out, not pastors. You got to get that right. No, that's a bad. Our missionaries don't have hands out. Not for the intention to have to do something for the pastors, to know them, but because there should be a warm and a tender care reciprocated between pastors and members. This is why Ephesus was comforted. As you look at verse number 22, that all goes together. I'm going to come and tell you about I've sent him, so they'll come and tell you about my affairs, that you may be comforted in your hearts. It's not separate phrasing. That's why they were comforted, because they cared about the Apostle Paul. They wanted to know how he was doing. The pastor's family, you may not believe this, but is very often lonely in the middle of hundreds of people. Be a Tychicus. Be a Tychicus. Know your pastor. Know your pastors. But secondly, be a Tychicus. Allow yourself to be a beloved brother. Look at verse number 21. But ye may also know my affairs and how I do. Tychicus, a beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, shall make known to you all things. Look at the phrase, beloved brother. You might just jump right over that affection that Paul gives towards Tychicus, but it means something. It means someone who is dear and able to be loved. We call them beloved. As a pastor, I find it hard to get close to some people. And I know there's different personalities. Perhaps this is because there's a certain necessity, respect for the office of a pastor, and I agree with that. But maybe it's simply because people are not so comfortable to be loved. Maybe you have gone through many things of your life that has put on you, kind of a crocodile exterior, and I understand that. But I would encourage you, allow yourself to be loved. On Friday, a man told me, quite superior in age to me, told me that he loved me. I was so embarrassed as I stood there. And I thought how to change the subject. I changed it really quickly. Sometimes it's hard to allow people to love you, isn't it? Is it just me, or is it true? Sometimes it's hard to take off our American, you stand over there, and at least 24 inches from me, don't get any closer. There are certain things you don't say. Don't be touching me. We're all, keep the proper distance, and, we talk about kind of things like how the weather is, the picnic was nice, general kind of things. We don't get into each other's hearts. Children of God get into each other's hearts. And they see sometimes ugly things about each other. And they're still beloved to each other. Because that's what family does. I would encourage you to be a beloved brother. Allow your pastors into your heart. You say, well, they're going to judge me. There's not a pastor in this church that's going to judge you. We know that we're the most worthless pieces of junk here, and that's the truth. beloved. Tychicus was a